The boy was 7 years old when he first heard a piano. Not on television or the radio, but in real life, standing in the doorway of a church on a cold Sunday morning in Chicago. His mother had dragged him there because she worked nights and needed somewhere safe for him to be while she caught a few hours of sleep. He didn't want to go. He didn't believe in anything back then except the fact that life was hard and nobody was coming to save him. But then he heard it. An old woman with gray hair and wrinkled hands sat at a dusty piano near the altar. She played a hymn he didn't recognize, something slow and sad and beautiful all at once. The notes floated through the air like they were alive, like they had weight and color and feeling. The boy stood frozen in that doorway, his worn sneakers squeaking against the tile floor, and for the first time in his young life, he felt something he couldn't name. It was peace. It was hope. It was the strange and terrifying realization that beauty existed in a world that had only shown him ugliness. He never forgot that moment. Growing up on the south side of Chicago wasn't easy for anyone, but it was especially hard for a kid with no father and a mother who worked herself to the bone just to keep the lights on. Their apartment was small, the walls thin enough to hear everything happening next door and down the hall. Gunshots weren't unusual. Sirens were the soundtrack of his childhood. Most kids he knew had already decided what their futures looked like. And none of those futures involved dreams. But this boy was different. He carried that piano music inside him like a secret, like a treasure buried so deep nobody could steal it. He started hanging around the church even when his mother didn't need him to. The old woman who played piano noticed him watching and smiled, but never said much. She was quiet. The kind of person who communicated through her music rather than her words. One afternoon, after everyone else had left, she waved him over to the bench. "You want to try?" she asked. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his chest. He sat down next to her, his small fingers hovering over the keys like he was afraid to touch them. She took his hand gently and placed it on the cool ivory. "Press down," she said. "Don't be scared." He pressed a single key. The note rang out through the empty church, pure and clear, and something clicked into place inside his soul. He didn't have words for it then, but years later, he would describe it as the moment he found his purpose. The old woman taught him the basics over the next few months. She showed him where middle C was, taught him simple scales, let him plunk out melodies while she corrected his posture and hand position. But she was sick, though she never talked about it. Her coughing got worse as winter set in, and by spring, she stopped coming to church altogether. He found out she passed away on a Tuesday in April. He was 9 years old. Nobody else at the church played piano. The instrument sat untouched in the corner, gathering dust, slowly going out of tune. The boy would walk past it every Sunday and feel his chest ache with a sadness he couldn't explain. That piano had given him something nobody else ever had. And now it was silent, but he wasn't ready to let go. One evening, when his mother was working late and the church was empty, he snuck inside through a back window that never locked properly. His heart raced as he tiptoed through the dark hallways, terrified of getting caught, terrified of what would happen if someone found a 10-year-old black kid breaking into a building at night. But he kept going because the pull was stronger than the fear. He sat down at that old piano and pressed a key. Then another. Then another. The notes were slightly off because the instrument needed tuning. But he didn't care. He started trying to recreate what he remembered from his lessons, his small fingers stumbling over the keys, making mistake after mistake, but he kept going. That became his routine. 3 or 4 nights a week, he would sneak into the church basement and teach himself to play. He found an old phone someone had thrown away, cracked screen but still functional, and used the free Wi-Fi from a coffee shop down the street to watch piano tutorials on YouTube. He watched the same videos over and over, pausing and rewinding, studying the hand movements until he could copy them. He learned Für Elise in 6 months. Moonlight Sonata took him a year. By the time he was 12, he was teaching himself Chopin, his fingers flying over the keys in the darkness while the rest of the neighborhood slept. Nobody knew. Not his mother, who was always working. Not his teachers, who had already written him off as another statistic. Not the other kids in the neighborhood, who would have laughed at him if they found out he spent his nights playing classical music in a church basement. This was his secret, his escape, his proof that he was more than what the world expected him to be. The years passed. He grew taller, his voice deepened, and life got harder in all the ways life gets harder when you're poor and black and invisible to the people who make decisions about your future. He watched friends drop out of school, watched others get arrested, watched a few end up in coffins before they turned 18. Every day felt like a battle, just to survive. But every night, he had the piano. He got good. Really good. The kind of good that comes from 10,000 hours of practice with nobody watching, nobody judging, nobody telling you what you can or can't become. He developed his own style, blending the classical pieces he learned from YouTube with the rhythms and emotions of his own life. When he played, you could hear the pain of the streets mixed with the beauty of the old hymns. The rage of injustice softened by something that sounded almost like hope. When he was 16, something unexpected happened. A scholarship application his guidance counselor had submitted on his behalf, mostly as a long shot, actually came through. A prestigious arts academy on the other side of the country had seen a video someone secretly recorded of him playing at a school talent show, and they wanted him. Full ride. Room and board included. A chance to study music with some of the best teachers in the country. His mother cried when he told her. She held his face in her hands and looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "I always knew you were special," she whispered. "I just didn't know how special." He packed everything he owned into a single suitcase, hugged his mother goodbye, and boarded a bus that would take him to a world he had only seen in movies. A world of marble floors and grand pianos, and students who had been taking lessons since before they could walk. A world where he was supposed to become someone new. But when he arrived at the academy and walked through those towering front doors for the first time, he realized something that made his stomach drop. He didn't belong here. The other students moved through the halls with a confidence he had never known. They talked about summer programs in Vienna, about their private instructors, about compositions they had written, and competitions they had won. Their clothes were expensive. Their instruments were new. Their futures were guaranteed. And then there was him. A self-taught kid from the south side of Chicago who had learned piano from a dead woman and YouTube videos, standing in the middle of a marble hallway with a cracked suitcase and no idea how he was supposed to pretend he was one of them. He had fought his whole life to get here. He had sacrificed everything, practiced until his fingers bled, believed in himself when nobody else did, but standing in that hallway, surrounded by people who looked at him like he was a mistake, someone needed to correct. He wondered if maybe the world had been right all along. Maybe some dreams weren't meant for people like him. The first week at the academy was the loneliest week of his life. He walked through those polished hallways like a ghost, invisible to everyone except when they needed someone to look down on. The other students didn't bully him exactly. It was worse than that. They simply acted like he wasn't there, like he was a piece of furniture someone had placed in the wrong room. He ate alone in the dining hall. He sat alone in his classes. He practiced alone in whatever empty room he could find, always waiting until the other students had finished so he wouldn't have to feel their eyes on him. The thing that hurt most wasn't the loneliness. It was the realization that everything he thought he knew about music meant nothing here. Back in Chicago, he had been proud of what he taught himself. He could play pieces that most people couldn't even dream of attempting. He had spent years mastering techniques, building speed, developing his own style. He thought he was ready. But on his very first day of theory class, the professor asked him to sight read a simple piece of sheet music. He stared at the page like it was written in a foreign language. Because for him, it was. He had never learned to read music. Not really. He learned everything by ear, by watching, by feeling. He could hear a piece once and recreate it almost perfectly, but put notes on a page in front of him and ask him to translate them into sound? He was lost. The professor didn't yell at him. She just sighed and moved on to the next student. And somehow that was worse. The other kids exchanged glances. A few smirked. One girl in the back row actually laughed. a quiet little sound that cut through him like a knife. That night, he called his mother from the payphone in the dormitory hallway. He didn't tell her what happened. He just wanted to hear her voice. Wanted to remember why he was doing this in the first place. She talked about her day at the hospital, about the neighbor's new dog, about the weather back home. Normal things. Safe things. "You doing okay, baby?" she asked, before hanging up. "Yeah, Mama," he lied. "I'm doing great." He hung up the phone and stood there in the empty hallway for a long time, fighting the urge to pack his bags and take the next bus home. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because going home meant admitting that everyone who ever doubted him was right. And he wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. The weeks passed, and he threw himself into catching up. He spent hours in the library studying music theory, teaching himself to read the notes that had always been a mystery to him. It was frustrating, humbling, work, things that came naturally to other students, felt impossible to him. But slowly, painfully, he started to improve. His playing got better too, though not in the way his professors wanted. They kept trying to change him, to sand down the rough edges of his style until he sounded like everyone else. They told him his interpretations were too emotional, too raw, too personal. They wanted precision and control. They wanted him to follow the rules. But following rules had never been his strength. Every time he sat down at a piano, something inside him rebelled against the idea of playing it safe. Music wasn't supposed to be safe. Music was supposed to make you feel something. Still, he tried to fit in. He practiced the pieces they assigned, played them the way they wanted, kept his head down and his mouth shut. He figured if he just worked hard enough, eventually they would see what he was capable of. Then the announcement came. The Academy's annual showcase was the biggest event of the year. Every spring, selected students performed in front of an audience filled with talent scouts, music professors from top universities, and industry professionals looking for the next big thing. Getting a spot in the showcase could change your entire life. It could open doors that would otherwise stay locked forever. He signed up immediately. For the next month, he practiced harder than he ever had before. He chose Chopin's Ballade. No. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. It was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious for someone who had only been formally trained for a few months. But he didn't care. This was his chance to show everyone what he could do. The auditions were held in the main recital hall, a beautiful room with velvet seats and a grand piano that cost more than his mother made in 5 years. He waited backstage with the other students, his palms sweating, his heart racing. When his name was called, he walked out onto that stage and sat down at the piano like he had done 1,000 times before. But this time was different. This time, people were watching. He took a deep breath and began to play. The music poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. Every late night in that church basement, every hour spent watching tutorials on a cracked phone, every sacrifice and struggle and moment of doubt, all of it flowed through his fingers and into the keys. He played with everything he had, holding nothing back. When he finished, the room was silent. He looked up at the panel of judges, trying to read their faces. The head of the music department, a stern man with silver hair and cold eyes, was writing something on his notepad. He didn't look impressed. He didn't look anything. The results were posted 3 days later. He wasn't on the list. At first, he thought there must be some mistake. He checked the list again, then again, scanning every name twice just to be sure. But his name wasn't there. Somehow, despite everything, he hadn't made the cut. He found the music director in his office that afternoon. The man looked up from his desk with an expression of mild annoyance, like he was being interrupted by something unimportant. "I wanted to ask about the showcase," the boy said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I thought my audition went well. I just wanted to understand why I wasn't selected." The director leaned back in his chair and studied him for a long moment. "Your audition was technically competent," he said finally. "But technique isn't everything. This showcase represents decades of tradition at this institution. The students who perform are ambassadors for our program. They reflect our values, our training, our standards. The boy waited, not understanding. You taught yourself to play from the internet, the director continued. You don't read music fluently. You improvise when you should follow the score. Your style is undisciplined, emotional, unpredictable. He shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, but you're simply not ready for this stage. Perhaps next year, if you continue to improve. The boy stood there, absorbing the words like punches. So you're saying I'm not good enough, he said quietly. I'm saying you don't fit, the director replied. And in this world, fitting matters more than you might think. He walked out of that office feeling like someone had reached into his chest and torn out his heart. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, meant nothing to these people. They didn't care how far he had come or how hard he had fought. They only cared that he wasn't like them. The other students found out, of course. Word spread fast in a place like this. Some of them pretended to feel sorry for him, offering hollow words of sympathy that felt more like pity. Others didn't bother pretending at all. He heard them whispering in the hallways, laughing in the practice rooms. That night, he called his mother again. This time, he told her everything. The rejection, the humiliation, the feeling that no matter what he did, he would never be accepted here. He told her he wanted to come home. She listened without interrupting, the way she always did. When he finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Baby, she said softly. Do you remember what you told me the night before you left? You said you were going to show the world what you could do. You said nothing was going to stop you. I know, but you didn't come all this way to quit, she said, her voice firm now. You didn't survive everything you survived just to let some man in a suit tell you who you are. You hear me? He closed his eyes, feeling tears slide down his cheeks. You are more than what they see, his mother continued. You always have been. Now you just have to prove it, not to them, to yourself. He hung up the phone and stood alone in that hallway for a long time, her words echoing in his mind. He wasn't going home. Not like this. Not defeated. If they wouldn't let him through the front door, he would find another way in. After the rejection, something changed inside him. He stopped trying to fit in. He stopped caring what the professors thought, what the other students whispered, what anyone expected him to be. If they didn't want him in their world, fine. He would build his own. He started practicing at night. The main recital hall was locked after 10 o'clock, but he discovered that the side door near the loading dock had a broken latch that never quite caught. If you pushed it just right, it would swing open without making a sound. He found this out by accident one evening when he was walking around campus. Too restless to sleep, too angry to sit still. The first time he snuck into that hall after hours, his hands were shaking. Not from fear of getting caught, though that was part of it. They were shaking because he finally felt free. The room was completely dark except for the red glow of the exit signs above the doors. He couldn't see the piano, but he knew exactly where it was. He walked across the stage with his arms stretched out in front of him until his fingers touched the smooth wood of the grand piano. He sat down on the bench, lifted the cover, and placed his hands on the keys. Then he played, without anyone watching, without anyone judging, without anyone telling him what he was doing wrong. He played like he hadn't played in months. He played the Chopin piece he had prepared for the audition, but this time he didn't hold back. He let the music go where it wanted to go. He added little improvisations, changed the tempo when it felt right, poured every ounce of emotion into every note. When he finished, he was breathing hard, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. He came back the next night. And the night after that. And every night for the next 3 weeks. It became his routine. He would go to his classes during the day, keep his head down, do what was expected of him. But at night, after everyone else was asleep, he would slip out of his dormitory and make his way to the recital hall. Those hours in the darkness became the only time he felt like himself. He wasn't just practicing the same pieces over and over. He was experimenting, exploring, pushing himself in ways he never had before. He would take a classical composition and blend it with rhythms from the gospel music he grew up hearing in church. He would start with Bach and somehow end up somewhere completely new, somewhere that didn't have a name yet. The music he created in that dark hall was unlike anything he had ever played. It was raw and beautiful and completely his own. One night, about a month into his secret sessions, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. He froze at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. His breath caught in his throat. The footsteps got closer, echoing through the empty hall. He was about to run when a voice spoke from the darkness. "Don't stop on my account." A flashlight clicked on, and he saw a man standing near the back of the hall. He was older, maybe 60 or so, with gray hair and a weathered face. He wore a janitor's uniform and carried a mop in one hand. "I've been listening to you for about 2 weeks now," the man said, walking slowly down the aisle toward the stage. "Every night. Same time. Same door. You're not as sneaky as you think." The boy's heart was still racing. "Are you going to report me?" The janitor laughed, a warm sound that echoed through the empty room. "Report you for what? Playing piano?" "Son, I've worked at this school for 23 years. I've heard a lot of students come through here. Kids with fancy teachers and expensive instruments, and all the opportunities in the world." He paused, looking up at the boy on the stage. "I've never heard anyone play like you." The boy didn't know what to say. He sat there in the darkness, waiting for the catch, waiting for the part where this turned bad like everything else, but it didn't come. The janitor climbed the steps to the stage and sat down in a chair near the piano. "My name's not important," he said, "but I used to play. Jazz, mostly. Had a band back in the day, toured around the country, thought I was going to make it big." He shrugged. "Life had other plans, but I still know music when I hear it. And what you've got, kid, that's not something they can teach in a classroom." "They don't think so," the boy said quietly. "The director said I don't fit." "The director is an idiot," the janitor replied without hesitation. "He's been here so long, he forgot what music is supposed to feel like. All he cares about is tradition and reputation, and making sure everything sounds exactly like it's supposed to sound. But that's not music. That's just copying." He leaned forward, his eyes serious now. "What you're doing up here in the dark, that's real. That's you putting your soul into those keys and creating something that never existed before. Don't let anyone take that from you." From that night on, the janitor became his secret ally. He would unlock the side door for him every evening and sit in the back row while he practiced. Sometimes he would offer advice, little things he remembered from his jazz days about rhythm and phrasing and how to make a piano breathe. Mostly, he just listened. Having someone believe in him changed everything. For the first time since arriving at the academy, the boy felt like he wasn't completely alone. The janitor didn't care about his background, or his lack of formal training, or any of the things that made him different. He only cared about the music. "You know the showcase is in 6 weeks, the janitor said one night. "I know," the boy replied, his jaw tightening. "I wasn't selected. I know that too." The janitor was quiet for a moment. But plans change sometimes. Things happen that nobody expects. You just keep practicing like you've been practicing. Be ready. "Ready for what?" The janitor smiled in the darkness. "You'll know when the time comes." The boy didn't understand what he meant, but he trusted him. So he kept practicing. Night after night, he pushed himself harder than ever before. He refined his technique, expanded his improvisations, worked on the Chopin piece until he could play it in his sleep. Word started to spread among a few students at the academy, not the ones in the director's inner circle, but the others, the ones who felt like outsiders too, who didn't quite belong in this world of privilege and tradition. They heard whispers about music drifting through the halls late at night. A few of them snuck out to listen, hiding in the shadows of the recital hall while he played. They never announced themselves. and he never knew they were there. But they heard him. And what they heard was something none of them would ever forget. One girl, a violinist who had been at the academy for 3 years without ever making the showcase herself, started crying during one of his late-night sessions. She told her roommate about it the next morning. "It was like nothing I've ever heard," she said. "It was like he was speaking directly to my soul." The roommate told someone else. And that person told someone else. And slowly, quietly, a rumor began to build. There was a boy who played piano in the darkness. A boy who wasn't supposed to be there. A boy who made music that could break your heart and put it back together again. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew his story. But everyone wanted to hear him play. The showcase was 5 weeks away, then 4, then 3, and somewhere in the shadows, something was building. Something that would change everything. He just didn't know it yet. The night of the showcase arrived faster than anyone expected. The academy had been buzzing for weeks, students rehearsing around the clock, professors offering last-minute advice, everyone walking around with nervous energy crackling in the air. This was the biggest night of the year. The night that could make or break careers before they even started. The boy watched it all from a distance. He wasn't part of it. He wasn't on the program. He was just another face in the crowd, expected to sit in the audience and clap politely while the chosen ones took their turn in the spotlight. The director had made it very clear that he didn't belong on that stage, and nothing had changed to suggest otherwise. But still, he put on his best clothes that evening. A simple black suit his mother had sent him. The nicest thing he owned. He looked at himself in the mirror of his small dormitory room and tried to recognize the person staring back at him. That scared kid from Chicago who used to sneak into church basements felt like a lifetime ago. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, but he knew he wasn't giving up. The janitor had told him to be ready. He still didn't know what that meant, but he trusted the old man. So he got dressed, walked across campus in the cool evening air, and took his seat in the back row of the auditorium. The place was packed. Every seat was filled with students, faculty members, parents, and most importantly, the guests. Talent scouts from major record labels, professors from elite music conservatories, concert promoters and managers looking for the next big thing. These were the people who could change your life with a single phone call. The boy looked around at all of them and felt something twist in his stomach. This could have been his chance. This should have been his chance, but instead, he was sitting in the back row like he didn't matter. The lights dimmed, the audience fell silent, and the showcase began. One by one, students took the stage and performed pieces they had been practicing for months. A girl played a flawless violin concerto. A boy performed a technically perfect piano sonata. Another student sang an aria that earned a standing ovation from half the audience. They were all good. Really good. The kind of good that comes from years of training with the best teachers money can buy. The kind of good that gets you into places like this academy in the first place. But as the boy sat there watching, he noticed something strange. The performances were impressive, yes. But they were also empty. Every note was in the right place. Every tempo was precisely measured. Every dynamic was exactly as the composer intended. And yet, somehow, none of it made him feel anything. It was like watching someone read a poem in a language they didn't understand. The words were all correct, but the meaning was lost. The intermission came after the 8th performance. The lights came up, and the audience began to mill around, stretching their legs and chatting with each other. The boy stayed in his seat, staring at the empty stage, lost in his own thoughts. That's when the commotion started. He heard shouting from backstage, voices raised in panic. A few moments later, a staff member rushed onto the stage and whispered something to the host. The host's face went pale. More people started rushing around, and the audience began to murmur with confusion. The boy overheard fragments of conversation from the people around him. Something about a pipe bursting, water flooding the green room, equipment getting damaged, costumes getting soaked. Half the performers for the second act were in chaos, trying to salvage what they could. The showcase was falling apart. The host walked to the microphone, his smile strained and artificial. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties backstage. Please bear with us for a few moments while we sort things out." We apologize for the delay. A few moments turned into 10 minutes. Then 20. The audience grew restless. People started checking their phones, whispering to each other, some even getting up to leave. The guests in the front rows, the scouts and professors who had come to discover new talent, looked bored and impatient. The director was pacing near the side of the stage, his face red with frustration. This was a disaster. The most important night of the year was unraveling in front of everyone, and there was nothing he could do about it. And then something happened that nobody expected. The janitor walked onto the stage. The boy sat up straight in his seat, his heart suddenly pounding. The old man moved slowly, confidently, like he belonged there. He walked over to the host and said something quietly. The host looked confused, then surprised, then uncertain. He glanced over at the director, who was too distracted to notice. The host stepped back to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, while we continue to address the situation backstage, we have a special interlude for you. Please welcome a student who will provide some entertainment while we prepare for the second half of our program. The audience looked puzzled. A student? Which student? The ones who were supposed to perform were all backstage, dealing with the flood. The boy felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text message from an unknown number. Stage door is open. It's time. His hands started shaking. He looked up and saw the janitor standing near the edge of the stage, looking directly at him. The old man nodded once. Slowly. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for, without even knowing it. The boy stood up. His legs felt like they were made of water. People in his row looked at him curiously as he squeezed past them toward the aisle. He walked down that long center aisle with 500 pairs of eyes on him, every step feeling like it took an hour. He could see the director now, standing near the front of the auditorium. The man's face went from confusion to recognition to anger in the space of about 2 seconds. He started to move toward the stage, ready to stop whatever was happening, but the janitor stepped into his path and said something that made him pause. The boy climbed the steps to the stage. The lights were bright, brighter than anything he had ever experienced. He couldn't see the audience anymore, just a sea of shadows beyond the glare, but he could feel them watching. Hundreds of people, waiting to see what he would do. He walked to the piano. That beautiful grand piano that had seemed so far out of reach for so long. He ran his fingers along the edge of it, feeling the smooth wood under his fingertips. This was real. This was actually happening. He sat down on the bench and looked out at the audience. Somewhere in the darkness, his mother was there. She had taken a 9-hour bus ride to be here tonight, using vacation days she couldn't afford to waste. She had told him she would be in the 5th row, center section. He couldn't see her, but he knew she was watching. The director had made it to the edge of the stage now. He was arguing with someone, his voice a harsh whisper. Any second, he might storm up there and drag the boy off. This might be the only chance he ever got. The boy took a deep breath. He placed his hands on the keys. He closed his eyes, and he played. The first note rang out through the auditorium, clear and pure and perfect. It hung in the air for a moment, suspended in time, and then the next note followed, and the next. And suddenly the music was pouring out of him like it had been waiting his whole life to escape. He played Chopin's Ballade, No. 1. But he didn't play it like anyone had ever played it before. He played it like a boy who had taught himself piano in a church basement. He played it like someone who had been rejected and humiliated and told he would never be good enough. He played it like a son who wanted to make his mother proud. He played it like a human being who had felt pain and joy and hope and despair, and who had channeled all of it into this single moment. The audience sat frozen in their seats. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody looked at their phones or whispered to their neighbors. They just listened. And somewhere in the 5th row, a mother who had worked double shifts her whole life to give her son a chance, clasped her hands together and let the tears roll down her face. The music filled every corner of that auditorium. It rose up to the ceiling and sank down into the floor. It wrapped around every person in every seat and held them there, unable to move, unable to look away. He wasn't just playing the notes anymore. He was telling a story. The first movement started soft, almost hesitant, like a child taking their first steps into an unknown world. That was him at 7 years old, standing in the doorway of that church, hearing a piano for the first time. The melody was gentle but searching, full of wonder and fear and desperate hope. Then it built. The tempo increased, the chords grew stronger, and suddenly the music was running, fighting, climbing. This was him teaching himself in the darkness of that church basement. This was every night he spent watching tutorials on a cracked phone screen. This was every time he told himself to keep going when everything inside him wanted to quit. The middle section was angry. His fingers crashed against the keys with a force that surprised even him. This was the rejection. This was being told he didn't fit. This was every whisper and every laugh and every moment someone looked at him like he was nothing. The music screamed with all the pain he had swallowed for so long, all the rage he had never been allowed to express. And then something shifted. The anger melted into something else. Something softer. Something that hurt even more than the rage because it was so fragile. So easily broken. This was hope. This was his mother telling him not to quit. This was the janitor sitting in the back row of an empty hall, believing in him when nobody else did. This was every person who had ever shown him kindness in a world that had given him so many reasons to stop believing. The final movement was transcendent. There was no other word for it. The music lifted and soared, and became something that didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to everyone in that room, every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough, every person who had ever fought for something they believed in, every person who had ever dared to dream when the world told them not to. He played the final notes with his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face. He didn't care who saw. He didn't care about anything except this moment, this music, this feeling of finally being exactly who he was meant to be. The last chord faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The auditorium was completely still, like time itself had stopped. He sat at the piano with his hands still resting on the keys, his chest heaving, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Then someone stood up. It was a woman in the front row, one of the talent scouts. She rose from her seat and started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Then the man next to her stood up. Then another person, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause was deafening. A wave of sound that crashed over him and nearly knocked him off the bench. People were cheering, shouting, some of them crying. The standing ovation went on and on. 4 minutes, 5 minutes, longer than anyone could remember in the history of the showcase. He stood up from the piano on shaking legs and looked out at the audience. He still couldn't see individual faces through the bright lights, but he could feel them. He could feel all of them, connected to him through the music he had just played. He bowed, and the cheering got even louder. Backstage, the director stood frozen with his mouth hanging open. He had been ready to storm the stage, ready to drag this uninvited student away and salvage what was left of his precious showcase. But now he couldn't move. He had just witnessed something he couldn't explain, something that defied everything he thought he knew about music and talent and who deserved to be on that stage. After the showcase ended, the boy was swarmed by people. Talent scouts pressed business cards into his hands. Professors from universities he had only dreamed about asked for his contact information. A famous pianist who had been in the audience, a man whose recordings he had listened to 1,000 times in that church basement, shook his hand and told him it was the most emotionally powerful performance he had heard in 40 years. "Where did you study?" the pianist asked. "I taught myself," the boy replied. "In a church basement in Chicago." The pianist stared at him for a long moment, then laughed with genuine delight. "Of course you did. That's why it was real." 3 major music schools offered him full scholarships that night. Before he even left the auditorium, his life had completely changed. But there was only one person he wanted to see. He found his mother in the lobby, standing near the back wall, away from the crowd. She wasn't trying to push through to get to him. She was just waiting, patient as always, letting him have his moment. When he reached her, he didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. She held him back, and for a long time they stood there together, mother and son, neither one wanting to let go. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered into his ear. "I always knew you could do this. I couldn't have done it without you, Mama," he said. "Everything I am is because of you." She pulled back and looked at his face, wiping the tears from his cheeks with her thumbs. "No, baby. Everything you are is because of you. I just loved you. You did the rest." The director never apologized. He quietly retired from the academy the following year. Though nobody ever said exactly why. Some people can't admit when they're wrong, even when the evidence is standing right in front of them. The janitor was there that night too. The boy found him near the side door where this whole journey had started. The door with the broken latch that had changed everything. "I don't know how to thank you," the boy said. The old man smiled, the same warm smile he had shown that first night in the dark recital hall. "You just did. Up there on that stage. That's all the thanks I'll ever need. Why did you help me? You didn't even know me." The janitor was quiet for a moment. "Because I was you. Once. A long time ago. I had a chance like this, and I let it slip away. I've spent the last 40 years wondering what might have been." He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I wasn't going to let that happen to you." 2 years later, the boy performed at Carnegie Hall. He was 22 years old, the youngest pianist to headline a solo concert there in over a decade. The reviews called him a genius, a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent. But he never forgot where he came from. The janitor passed away 6 months before that Carnegie Hall concert. Heart attack. Peaceful in his sleep. The boy found out from a letter that arrived at his apartment, sent by the old man's daughter. At every concert since then, he leaves one seat empty in the back row. No matter what venue, no matter how important the performance, there is always one seat that nobody is allowed to fill. When people ask him about it, he just smiles and says it's for a friend. A friend who believed in him when nobody else would. A friend who saw something in a scared kid playing piano in the dark and decided that was worth protecting. A friend who proved that sometimes the people who change your life aren't the ones with the power and the titles and the fancy offices. Sometimes, they're the ones who unlock the door and sit quietly in the back row, waiting for you to become who you were always meant to be. The boy from Chicago is a man now. He has played on stages all over the world, won awards he never dreamed of winning, inspired thousands of young musicians to believe in themselves. But whenever someone asks him about his journey, he always tells the same story. It's the story of a 7-year-old boy who heard a piano in a church and felt something he couldn't name. A boy who was told he didn't belong. A boy who refused to quit. And a single note that left them all breathless.